Okay, let's start. This is the first of a series called City Talk that the Canadian Urban Institute's initiated. I'm Mary Rowe, I'm the president of CUI, and we've been focused for the last couple of weeks on creating platforms to allow people to learn from one another, peer-to-peer learning. We're in the connected tissue business at CUI, so we created two sites, the citywatchcanada.ca and citysharecanada.ca, both focused on sharing information across the country in terms of what municipal governments were doing, but also what the community response is and what are the smart ways that people are improvising and trying to respond as imaginatively as they can. This is a volunteer effort that we've been working with partners. We have our staff, we're small, and then we have partners across the country, and then many, many, many volunteers that have been committing their time and working through the night off. And so thank you very much. It's really an all hands on deck moment, and we continue to need support on this. And so if you've got bandwidth, you've got an hour a day where you can help us populate those sites and help us track what's going on in the urban environment across the country, please email us at covidresponse@canurb.org. I want to acknowledge that it's an unusual time, obviously, and we are connecting people across the country, and in this case, we have someone from New York. So I want to acknowledge appropriately that we are in First Nations, what our relationship is with the First Nations community. So I'm going to indicate the ones here in Toronto, but I just want to be clear that we have people across, as I suggested, the continent who have different relationships, but ours are that we are the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and are now home here in Toronto to many diverse First Nations, the Inuit, Métis peoples from across Turtle Island. We also acknowledge that in Toronto in particular is covered by Treaty 13, signed with the Mississaugas of Credit, and the Williams Treaty signed with multiple Anishinaabe nations. We are very conscious of this, could we be more, in terms of the continuity of challenge that First Nations have experienced for generations, and that we now collectively across the world seem to be confronted with. I also just want to add another caveat that we appreciate that there are thousands and thousands of Canadians, particularly public servants and civil servants, who are completely engaged in emergency response work, and that this conversation is no replacement for that. And that we have been very careful to make sure that whatever we've been trying to put together does not overly tax the time of the people that are on the front lines, and that we're trying to create companion processes and ways to engage more folks in responding in a collective way. So we just want to make sure that we're clear about that, and we've been also very careful about not spreading misinformation. So I'm going to suggest that in these sessions, these City Talk sessions, we're asking our participants to really be focused on very practical things. What are they actually observing? What are they actually seeing in their work and in their communities? And for us to not indulge in a lot of prognosticating or sort of artificial kind of theoretical chat. We really want to be grounded in what we're seeing is actually happening and focusing on specifics. At CUI, we've been thinking about what's working, what's not, and what's next. And we want to have our time horizons aligned. So there are immediate things, there are maybe shorter, intermediate term things, maybe through the summer, and then there are longer term things. But we're going to see if we can hold that tension and have that multi-layered conversation as we go. So we are going to record this session. And then we will extract from it all the smart things that my colleagues say, and we'll get it up for posterity, up on a blog. We may be pulling some of the audio content, and we're keen to be able to have an archive for this and for us to be able to refer back to it, and for other people who can't be on today to learn. So that's important, we think, and that's why we're adding all the other technology. If you have a question that you want to pose for this gang, or a comment, you can put it into the chat box, and I will try to refer to it, and my colleagues will catch it, and we will see if we can get it addressed. But we only have an hour. We're doing at least 2 a week of these, and so if you have suggestions for other topics, other folks you want to hear from, other burning issues that you think we should be addressing, just email us at covidresponse@canurb.org, or put it in the chat box, and we will try to respond. So, focus today, architecture, urban planning, urban design. I appreciate there's a lot of talk within those disciplines about which discipline is whose, who does it, who doesn't do it, and we realized we weren't going to get it perfect. But we've got a smattering of folks here who do some planning, some design, and some architecture, and we're obviously not fully representative here. We don't have as much diversity as we need to, obviously, and we're going to try to make sure that we hear from as many communities and as many diverse voices as we possibly can as the series rolls out. So none of these sessions is going to be exhaustive or comprehensive or perfect. It's just to get us going. So joining us today, Franc D'Ambrosio from Victoria, just wave Frank so they know who you are. Janna Levitt from Toronto, architect from Toronto. Adam Lubinsky from New York, who's at the bottom of my phrase, I'm not sure where he is. And Alex Bozikovic, who's the architecture critic for the Globe and Mail. We have been describing COVID as a kind of particle accelerator, that it basically pushed a whole bunch of things that may have been percolating in the urban environment all of a sudden to the front, and now we're being confronted with it in what we're calling COVID time. So I want to start by posing a question. I'm going to ask Adam, he's our visitor, Adam Lubinsky from New York City, if he'll start by just talking to us a little bit about what are the immediate impacts that you're seeing on your practice and your work and the projects that you're working on in New York or other parts, because I know that Adam is with WXY Studio in New York City, and they do projects all over the place. So Adam, can you start us off?
Sure, absolutely. And Mary, thank you for having me on board. And I just want to echo what you're saying, that, you know, this is an unbelievable time in New York City, and there are a lot of people under a tremendous amount of stress and pressure, and I just want to acknowledge that. And you know, when I speak about the work that our office is doing now, we're obviously able to be working remotely in a way that a lot of people who are in New York City are not, and so it's a really difficult, incredible time that way. And so just as a starting point, I think it is useful to describe what happens to a practice before talking about our work and our projects themselves. And so we began to go remote about 3+ weeks ago, March 9th. You know, it was a whole process of setting up infrastructure to do that. And one of the things that has been interesting about it is, of course, the kind of social infrastructure that we had in our office, lunch space, social time, are things that we're essentially replicating now through virtual office means. And that's one of the aspects of this crisis, is figuring out how to build those internal capacities so that we can do our work. And so we've been using Microsoft Teams. We have different teams and channels set up through that, including a virtual office that has a virtual cooking class and virtual music, virtual entertainment, and so virtual book recommendations. And so, you know, part of what we've needed to do is really step up these pieces of social infrastructure. The means of communication have changed. We talk to each other every day now, and we have cohorts that talk to each other. And so that in and of itself has been an incredible process to figure out. In terms of our work itself, there are many projects that are going on hold. And that's something that, you know, we simply have to accept. You know, projects that have been under construction that are no longer to be able to stay under construction, we recognize that those need to be on hold. We have a project, you know, with New York Public Libraries that it clearly had to be put on hold. We do have a couple of construction projects that are in affordable housing that, at least as far as I'm aware, up to date, have been allowed to continue because they're seen as essential work. But I think part of what we're trying to do is open up those conversations with our clients, which tend to be public agencies or institutions, or in some case, private sector folks, and say, you know, are there ways that we can pivot in the work that we're doing to address current challenges and current concerns? And that's
are you talking about repurposing work that you've already been engaged to do?
That's right, and that's right. And those are, well, you know, on many levels, you know, whether it is a planning project, we're working in an area of Brooklyn where we're undertaking a planning exercise to look at economic development. And the group that we're working with, they are simply dealing with companies that are furloughing workers, and they're trying to figure out how they might get their workers back in 5 months. And so, you know, we haven't figured it out with them yet because it's complicated, because funding comes from this stream and that stream, but how can we lend capacity in those situations? So that's a real challenge, is to figure out if and how we can do those pivots to provide immediate assistance.
Great. So let's stop with that, and then we'll probably come back to it. Frank, let's go to the other end of the country. Let's go to Victoria. Tell us what's going on and what are you observing?
I think that what I'm seeing is three kinds of impacts that I can identify right now. One is, and they both apply to public sector and private sector. The more personal ones echo Adam's completely. We started over a month ago because I have an autoimmune condition, so I had to isolate from my office before we all dispersed. But in that, I spend a lot of time alone. I ride a bike, and so I'm watching what's happening to the city as everybody else self-isolates, looking at examples like New York and other places. So I see impacts on policies and projects that were planned and are ongoing, but they were planned in the past. And both their development strategies, their funding, their political and policy relationships, approval agencies. So we're dealing with those in a certain way. Then we're dealing with impacts on policies and planning processes during the pandemic, which we foresee happening right now, but also in the future, in the near future. And those have to do with live applications for development permits or building permits, ongoing construction, all those. So there are significant impacts on those spheres. And then we're foreseeing policy and planning impacts in the future. How will we plan differently? How will we adapt projects that were already in process? And how will that impact what we do? And we're already starting to feel it. In a meeting this morning, we're designing a new complex for the electrification of transit buses. So it's a new service facility for electronic buses. Our team consists of people across BC and one in Alberta, and we have to discuss the implications of doing that for the future needs of transit. So it's really kind of interesting how it's finding its way into everything. But really those three areas are what I feel, because you have to look backwards, look at your current condition, and then how the heck are we going to deal with these same things in the future?
Right. I mean, the whole nature of the way the business is actually being done is going to be completely upturned.
And the nature of the projects, like social spaces in office complexes, the actual numbers of people that may or may not, because of this condition of working remotely, a lot of people realize that's part of what they do could be done remotely. So the size of rental spaces is already being discussed by the office buildings that we're planning. Do
you mean a commercial rental, Frank, or do you mean apartments need to be bigger because people will be working from
Well, I was coming to that, but no, so far the conversations I've had have to do with office workspace, because we're in the process of designing a couple office buildings.
Right. Okay, Janna, let's go to Toronto.
Sure. So I would completely echo what Adam and Frank said about working remotely and some of the challenges with that. Although I would add that for me, one of the things that's been really striking is because of the rapidity with which we went from being all together in an office to all of us kind of atomizing over almost 40 different locations. There's been a lot of anxiety, and that anxiety is compounded by the uncertainty that every day brings in terms of the waves of news. So even as current as last Friday, when they announced that there would be a further reduction of the amount of construction that could happen, you could feel it was palpable within all the conversations in the office. People were worried, Do I still have a job? Am I going to lose some of my time at work? What does this mean going forward? And so it's actually meant a lot more non-sort of work-related work for us to help people actually just cope with the stresses, because outside of work, they're hearing all of their friends are losing their jobs, and people are, you know, one paycheck away from losing their housing or losing many things, losing their health. And so it's really the first time in my experience of working where there's been, you know, I've lived through many recessions, but none have struck this deeply in terms of how people feel about themselves. It's really at their core. And then I think the other thing that I've really noticed, we're very fortunate in that most of our public sector work has not been stopped yet. It's all in, so far, anything not-for-profit housing is continuing, libraries are continuing, university work is still continuing. So in that sense, we've been fortunate. Our private houses have, except for one, all stopped. Totally understandable. But what I find actually really interesting is how it's made me actually understand that in our journeys from one place, from work to home, home to work, walking out at lunch to get lunch, all of those breaks in the day where everybody goes out to get nourished by the culture, by civic life, is absolutely cut off. And that has really reduced the quality of our collective lives in a way that I hadn't actually been able to articulate until this went on. That has, I think, made a significant impact on all of us.
You mean in terms of your capacity to work, or just your general sense of life in
Both.
urban?
Both.
Yeah.
Yeah, because you're not, the lack of stimulation. What happened on the streetcar? I work near Kensington Markets. Every day there was always something to talk about some place going out of business, or a new place starting, or somebody doing a little pop-up something, all the little, you know, collateral that actually feeds into your work in ways you don't really appreciate until it's withdrawn. And it was withdrawn so quickly that I think it's actually, people are feeling the absence of it in a way that you wouldn't feel if it was a little bit of a reduction, a gradual reduction.
Yeah, I mean, it's been so sudden, as you say. I'm just watching the chat box, and we're going to come to you, Alex, next. Just for the others, just to keep in mind this. First of all, I would be interested to hear from Janna and Frank whether the federal supports the 80% wage subsidy, is that working for people in the urban development professions?
No, we're hoping that gets corrected, but it absolutely doesn't work for anyone like us who's like a service provider. It works for people who are wage earners, cash businesses, that kind of thing. And I get it. You have to go by the biggest bundle, and then you narrow your focus, but it doesn't help us at all, sadly. So we need to.
And I echo that. In fact, quite the opposite. We're finding ourselves being asked for deferrals and contributions to the agencies that are associated with our client groups, the nonprofits we work for, and so on. They're reaching out because there are a lot of disadvantaged people that are suffering the most in terms of employment.
Right. Okay, so Alex, I'm going to come to you, but just for everyone's benefit. So we're being asked a couple of general questions in the chat. One is, what's the ultimate impact that we're anticipating in terms of urbanism? What's going to happen to density? What do we think the impacts are going to be on the future of intensification? All those things. That's one. The second thing is, what about the impact on the public realm? Because we're seeing more demands on the public realm, obviously, and does that need to change? Local retail. What do we see there? What do you anticipate? And then I think there is a whole question about digital and whether or not the smart cities digital movement that we've been witnessing is up to the task to respond. But anyway, Alex, why don't you give us a sense of what you're observing? You're writing about this and watching across the country, and then we'll dig in a bit more on some of these other specific questions. Go ahead, Alex.
Right. I think those first couple of points that you just brought up really echo what I have been focusing on. Not as a journalist rather than a practitioner. I've just been trying to figure out what this means. And I do think those, are a couple of the most critical issues. One is going to be how the politics of development and the politics around planning change as a result, whether we're going to take the lesson from this pandemic that somehow essentially that cities are bad, that cities are a site for disease or disease transmission. And certainly there's a history of that. I don't think in this case that is scientifically accurate.
History of what, Alex? A history that there's a popular cultural meme out there that wants to demonize cities?
Well, certainly, exactly right. And, there is also, if you look at how cities evolved through the 20th century, a disease was certainly an important factor in how architecture and how the discipline of urban planning came together, right? Disease literally or disease metaphorically, blight, both literally and, figuratively was, an important factor in how, our current how cities as they are today took shape. So, I think there's certainly the potential for that to happen again, for people to latch on to the idea that we need to put everyone in a house with lots of space in between them in order to keep people healthy. I've seen hints of that already, and I wonder whether that'll continue. I think it will. And I think, the other point, which you also mentioned, Mary, is about public space. I think certainly for those of us who live in cities and in parts of cities that are walkable, this change, the lack of public life that Janna was talking about, this change is very acute, right? We can really see it and feel it. But I think that we're not alone in that. I think that almost everyone at this point understands public space differently. I think this has shaken up people's experience of what it is to be outside in an urban environment. And on the one hand, it's become clear almost everywhere that the amount of space we have for people to walk around or people to cycle, to be outside, not in a car, that space is inadequate. And I wonder whether the lesson of that is going to be that we need more of it, or that we should reallocate.
Can I just follow you on this? You mean the space is inadequate in that it's not wide enough to have more than, the sidewalks are too narrow, and some of our ravines here, for instance, too narrow. You can't enjoy it with social distancing, right?
Exactly right.
What you mean?
Exactly right. That is what I mean. And I think that, when you look at street right-of-ways anywhere in North America, you see a lot of space that is now used for vehicular traffic and for parking, and not a lot of space used for walking, much less for bike lanes. And I think, at least temporarily, I think there've been a lot of calls to change that, to rebalance that. I think that makes a lot of sense as a temporary measure, some sort of rebalancing, and I wonder whether that is going to stick.
Right.
I think the pandemic is shining a light on all these things, and I think efforts that have been either marginal or fraught with controversy, like in Victoria, for instance, the purposeful proliferation of segregated bicycle paths through the city, has been a battle, a block by block battle, the reduction of parking spaces and so on. When I cycle around now, when there's hardly a vehicle around, comparatively, I was out at rush hour, cycling down the middle of the street, looking at the proportions of the segregated bike paths that have been built versus the 3 travel lanes, in some cases 4 travel lanes, and the parking lanes that have been allocated for us when we drive. There's an imbalance there that people have recognized, and some people are struggling to rectify it. This is shining a light on it. I believe that after this isolation, if it was to end, but during it, a lane was closed on every 3 and 4 lane road in the city, no one would miss it when we come back. And that would be an interesting experiment. It would almost be a guerrilla urban design thing to actually do, because I think that will be an impact if we can take that and turn it into momentum. Look at this silver lining of this. Same goes with sidewalk widths, with mobility devices and so on. There are sidewalks that barely have 1.5 to get around them when they are there, get around a telephone pole. So I think these things are going to be magnified. And that comes to the other one about urban space, the idea of a rhythm throughout of green spaces and public open spaces. Victoria sold off a lot of its public land. So there's a dearth of public spaces at a community scale. There is no, and we're thought of as a green place, but still we have issues. And I know that's typical of cities across North America, a lot of them who gave up their public space. So I think the idea of reclaiming the commons in terms of urban design, urban planning is going to flourish if our professions promote it. And I think that's going to be one of the things that we can offer up, take the momentum caused by this pandemic and this difficulty and stretch it. And I just want to say one last thing about the density. There is going to be the new kind of NIMBY. It's going to be the rallying cry for NIMBYism. And I think that that's a mistake because science doesn't bear that out. Suburban environments are as prone, if not more prone, was something I read recently, that more prone to transmittal of viruses and different kinds and bacteria. So I think that it's going to be our role, if we want to do anything, it's think about it, figure it out, get to our politicians and our policymakers and have an impact that foresees having to have a better urban life, because we do miss it. Janna is so right. We tried to have, so we had our third happy hour on Friday, because our office has a very strong culture of interacting. We bring in guests and so on, and there's a marked sense of kind of absence. And we're lucky to have these media and digital formats that we can at least look at each other in the face and say clever things about our life now. But where you put this over a series of months, and it could get very grim very quickly. So I think it's really important that we carry on the lessons learned into the future.
Alex, you wrote last week about NIMBY, and you're questioning about whether we're going to see, a real resurgence of anti-density. What's your take on this now? I mean, it's a week since. What do you think?
Well, I wrote about it in the context of California. I was responding to a book by the New York Times journalist Connor Doherty called Golden Gates, which is about the housing politics of the San Francisco Bay Area, which has some of the most sort of Baroque NIMBYism anywhere. But, I think we're going to have to see, but fundamentally, I think there's a confusion between density and crowdedness. Brent Totteran wrote about this today. And Adam, I mean, maybe you could talk about this a little bit. Your mayor has been apparently a little bit confused about the difference between density and bringing people together. How is that playing? I'm curious to hear how that's playing out, for you professionally and in New York. How does this conversation sound there?
Adam, you're muted. Adam, you're muted.
I don't know which pronouncement you're referring to, but the mayor did.
Too much density, right?
Yeah, he did initially open a number of streets for pedestrians and cyclists and turned away cars, and then he reversed himself. Right. And, I think we still have an enormous amount to learn about the impacts of different kinds of spaces and densities. Certainly we see other densities around the world, like Singapore, like Hong Kong, that have not, and Seoul, Korea, that haven't suffered the way New York has. San Francisco is the second densest city in the US and hasn't had the same impacts as New York City. And New York has been through other instances of not knowing what to do after a tragic moment. And 9/11, there were many pronouncements against the building of tall buildings. And that clearly, some things remained in place in New York City. Building lobbies and security really transformed, but other things like pronouncements against tall buildings did not hold. And I think we're going to need to learn, again, what some of the causes are and separate those from what some of the fears are. Now, if density still continues, there still may be potential to look at land use changes. So we can be dense, but we could also be multi-centered, so we're not as dependent on transit. So essential workers don't have to travel the distances they're traveling today, so that workers are closer to home. And so, you know, the mixing of uses, the creation of more of a multi-centered city in New York or places like Toronto, there is longer term potential to change the structure of our city in response to these things.
Adam, do you have impediments to that now? And I'm interested for Janna to weigh in on this in terms of multi-centered. I mean, are there actual policies that are inhibiting you from doing that now?
No, I mean, those things have been in sort of slow development over the last 15, 20 years. Downtown Brooklyn, Long Island City, Queens, right. Even Jamaica, Queens. Those are places that have started to become more live work 21st century CBDs in a way that Lower Manhattan has not become because of the way it's been shaped. So, but those things can be accelerated, and there should be pressure to accelerate those kinds of moves. So, you know, density can still hold, but, you know, let's not have people traveling as much. The other example is after Superstorm Sandy, where an area in far Queens called the Rockaways was hit severely, and there was a huge outcry to improve transit from the Rockaways into Midtown Manhattan and Lower Manhattan. And while some of that was valid, it was also equally valid to say, let's build up Jamaica, Queens as a real commercial center, and which has to a degree been happening. So we need to look at how we shape our cities, not just in terms of density, but in terms of land use and in terms of mix of uses.
I think that's a really,
I want to get Janna in, and then I'll go to you, Alex. Go ahead, Janna.
I think there's actually a really interesting discussion about density, and to take an example of what's working at the moment in a kind of hyper-local, to use your expression, Mary. There's been a lot of really neighborhood activities that are taking over streets. They're using the street as a means to get together and still maintain social distancing. And so I actually think the street is a missed opportunity in terms of thinking about public space. And there have been really great examples of pop-ups that are done in a hyper-local way. And I think the resistance to close down streets is one that I find a real mystery, because there are so few cars on the street that if you just took over half the width of the street, we would have a way more robust public life that ensured social distancing appropriately, but allowed people to experience some sense of a real civic life, as opposed to the synthetic life that we all live now, talking through Zoom and computers. And so I think that if there's an argument for density, I think it's that what we need to do is call and ferret out all those places that are part of cities that we haven't actually, like the High Line is an example of infrastructure that is now part of our experience in our amenity space, or the Beltway is another example of found space that was considered redundant. And I think in cities, there are a whole lot of opportunities to find those spaces that would support a really good quality of life now and moving forward without having to extend or take over more land. It's to have a creative reimagination about what the nature of streets are.
Can I thread back to what Frank was going on and what you've just touched on? I know, Alex, you want to get in, but the notion of pilots. You know, New York is the king of pilots. You started it, and then Toronto started to copy, and then the pilots is a way of easing a change, and then when all hell does not break loose, you can make it more permanent. I'm curious about hardening of bike lanes and how, and this notion that you might be able to appropriate a portion of a street under certain conditions. So if over the next year, we have times when we need to go into social distancing and locking down and we have to come out of it, are there ways that we could introduce things that could be done overnight? All of a sudden, everybody knows this street and that street goes to one lane. just like in New Orleans, when New Orleans needs to evacuate, they invoke counterflow, and all the roads, all the traffic goes out. Could we have our own versions of counterflow that we could snap in and snap out? And I'm not suggesting that it wouldn't be, you might not find, wow, we really actually like having that roadway only one lane, thanks very much. And then you could gradually work into it. But I'm just wondering if there's some kind of, is there an opportunity, as you suggested, Frank, a bit perverse, for us to, let's try some things that may in fact prove to be useful in the longer term?
Vancouver did that. That's how they solved the conversion of a lane of the Burrard Bridge. They said, okay, we're going to do a pilot project for a year or two, whatever it was, and they put temporary barriers up, and they tried it, and now it's permanent, but not without a lot of machinations. In Victoria and actually across Vancouver Island, I think on the mainland as well, the idea of pocket parks, so they take two parking spaces, parallel parking spaces, construct a sitting area, and some of them have survived. They were initial experiments, for a weekend or for this or for that, but that actually works. I think the attribution of uses in the public right-of-way is the way to go. It is the biggest publicly owned property in any city. So the way we use it has been dominated by people who wanted convenience when they were in their private automobile. Simple as that. And the servicing. So really, as an electorate, as civic, our civic leaders respond to our desires. So we're going to have to use the democratic means at our disposal and the different government, municipal government acts and charters of the cities that have charters to enact that. But we're going to have to get popular support for it. And therefore, I think it's up to the design profession to demonstrate through pilot projects and through analysis of precedent and preparing visual material, communication material to translate it. There are people chalking out traffic calming strategies on the streets during block parties. We know how to do it, and it can be virtually grassroots, guided by the related professions. And I think that kind of, if we come back with guns blazing, we should be able to make some progress in that regard. I don't think we'll have as much problem from here on in or in the future planning and executing segregated bike systems when people realize how many people are out there on bikes when they are there. So, well,
I would like to believe that you're right, Frank, but I think there's a real potential that the politics are going to go the other way. Yeah. I think, people who are defensive about driving, people who are defensive about their need to live, in a suburban environment aren't going to be less so after this. I think there's going to be, for some people at least, a real rush to the house, rush to the suburbs. And I think I should say that public transit, I think, is going to be really vulnerable after this. I think there are a lot of people who are going to be more reluctant. People who have the choice are going to be reluctant to use public transit. And maybe that makes a little bit more sense scientifically than sprawl does. But, in a nutshell, I think that, the substance of what Frank is bringing up is absolutely right. But, it may be tough to make that argument. So, staking things out now, pilot projects, it's really the, sort of tactical urbanism right now, that establishes a new, and better reality is going to be very valuable in as much as we can make that happen.
I'm hopeful that the move towards a work-life balance will create a philosophical shift, and those things happen very slowly. But I think in terms of value systems being modified by spending more time with your family or with a close friend or with a caregiver, cared for relationships, is going to cause a shift in priorities, I think, in the population if it's nurtured after. Because we have a supreme capacity to forget the past as humans.
Can we pick up and talk about transit for a minute, and then I want to get into some retail, because I think people are asking about local retail. One question I have is, the fear we're all going to have now is that people will be afraid to take transit. They will get into their cars. we want to shift them onto bikes. Are we going to have the public will to actually invest in transit? And should we be investing in different kinds of transit, more flexible transit? Right now in Toronto, the transit infrastructure is heavy into areas that actually don't need people going to. So if we had a BRT system, would we be better? Do you guys want to just comment a little bit about what you see the future for transit, or even in the shorter term, what do we need to be thinking about for transit?
Education. I think, generally speaking, the transfer of germs and viruses and so on is not understood. I think the communication of scientists, I have a very good friend who's a climate change scientist, and I say, you guys are a failure at communicating the urgency of climate change. And that is a public relations and a communication problem. And I think educating on how things actually work will go along with the anti-densification and the anti-transit sentiments that will emerge. I totally agree that will be the reaction until it is explained convincingly and accurately by government and by science community.
Janna and then Adam. Janna first, then Adam.
I think we need extremely affordable transit that offers a very good system so that people from all over the greater metropolitan area and even perhaps the suburbs with the different form of transit can move around for a reasonable cost. And I think without that, people are going to take their cars because
and it has to be, and somehow, Janna, it's got to be safe. I mean, I know now that there are transit systems operating now where the doors shut once they've got 15 people on a streetcar so that they can have social distancing. The TTC here in Toronto is already doing that. Do we need to have that kind of thing, as Frank just suggested? We've got to communicate that it's safe, that it's being managed appropriately, that it's nimble and flexible. And Adam, do you want to jump in? You're still muted, Adam.
muted.
I'm trying to be so careful.
Trying to be Canadian, I know. We appreciate the New Yorker and you trying to be polite as a Canadian. Thank you.
You know, I'm not a public health expert, but you will see webcams of people in Seoul, Korea getting onto buses. And the thing is, they clearly are finding ways to track the virus and infected people that are allowing them to deal with these issues. So there is a question of science, there are questions of privacy, and there are going to be ways that we're going to be able to get back on mass transit with less fear. So I mean, this is to echo some of Frank's points. Just in terms of the cars, there was a very powerful article in the New York Times today about the impact of air quality on fatality rates tied to COVID. And so there really needs to be a much, much stronger action taken against congestion, you know, that relates to both truck emissions and car emissions. And so there really should be a lot of people wielding a lot of these statistics showing that we need to reduce congestion. And so that points to mass transit, and it points to bike paths and also electrification of vehicles. All of these things really need to be, you know, it's part of our climate change action, it's part of our baseline improvement of urban conditions, but we've got more urgency now around making those improvements.
I agree, and I think going to the idea of a multi-centered city, or to adopt a slightly different concept that's popular these days, the 15-minute city or the 20-minute city, I think those ideas are really going to be valuable by reducing the length of people's trips and the number of vehicle trips that people need to take. You know, you have problems. You know, even in terms of disease transmission, you know, a suburban Walmart or Costco is not any better than an urban corner store or small grocery store as a transmission point. It might actually be worse, right? And I think there are a number of dimensions that are parallel. You know, even infrastructure. I mean, in most cities in North America and most governments in North America have gone towards, you know, fewer and larger public institutions. You know, hospitals are being centralized, schools are being consolidated and centralized, you know, and there are, you know, there's a clear economic case for those things, but, you know, along the way, we have been losing redundancy, you know, specific local capacity, And I think these things are linked. I think having cities that do not rely on, a single place to buy groceries, or so few places to buy groceries, or so few places to be treated, the more variety and the more redundancy we have, both in, in commerce and in the public sector, I think the better off we are in every sense.
Alex, can we talk a little bit back, just circle back on something you talked about earlier, which was this idea of multi-centered development. And I think there's obviously, we've got two emergencies happening at once. I appreciate the chat box is full of smart comments and ideas, and we're trying to pick up as much as we can. There are two emergencies, climate and COVID, all together. And if you, as you suggest, and as others have reinforced, if we're going to now have people working from home and we can now have more amenities locally and maybe we don't have to trek too far, what's the risk of sprawl? What's the risk that actually we're going to lose our commitment to the more environmentally responsible way of building? I
think the risk is high.
I think sorry, go ahead.
We have to curtail that by exerting priorities, and priorities should be to feed ourselves. And I think the production and the food security issues are again one of those issues that is going to be under the magnifying glass because of this. So I think from an urban planning point of view, in BC we use the agricultural land reserve as a no-go zone to contain urbanization. I think those regulations and policies have to be reinforced, re-examined, and in fact strengthened to withstand the onslaught of the temptation to go out and to spread.
What do other people think? Janna, what do you, or Alex, you go first. Sorry, I went to you first. Go.
That's okay. Yeah, no, I think there's a lot of potential there. I think, I'm reluctant to bring out my hobby horses at this time, but I think, we're getting to one of them now, which is that most North American cities are not actually very dense at all. Certainly the post-war parts of any city in North America are, for the most part, not at all dense. And there's a lot of room for intensification, broad intensification, which would serve both climate resilience and would serve a number of other agendas. There's a lot of room to, if every North American city had a Brooklyn in it, in terms of size and population density, we would be a lot better off. And they don't.
You mean you mean like a similarly dense already in place? Yeah. I mean, Vancouver does.
Exactly.
Vancouver has
city, an area of, well, it doesn't though. I mean, downtown Vancouver is quite dense, and as soon as you leave downtown Vancouver, Metro Vancouver turns into, a pretty sprawly place and a not very dense place. Even most of the city of Vancouver, doesn't really have a lot to do with, the vision that shaped downtown Vancouver. So, and I think the planning profession has a responsibility here to really acknowledge that. The planning profession to focus on its victories and on the points where, the stuff is happening. This idea of, node and spoke intensification, and on, getting new communities or rebuilt communities right. But I think the real challenge is broad intensification of the post-war city, which can be done, at a modest scale in a broad way, and which would serve a whole bunch of goals all at once. And I don't really see that's not a particularly sexy or a particularly obvious kind of agenda, but I think that's really where we should be focusing, no less in the wake of this pandemic than we were before.
I'm hoping we can have something on neighborhood retail, gang. Janna, have you got any thoughts on this? I mean, you shop in Kensington Market. I know this. I know you rely on your local vendors. Maybe this is all connected, where people shop, where they're going to live. Do you have a thought on this about what's going to happen to street retail?
I think it's actually quite frightening, but again, I don't think density is the enemy going forward. And I would agree with Alex 100% that we're not dense enough. We just need to do it differently. We can't have this bifurcation of single family houses and 60-story condos. There's got to be a middle ground, the missing middle, which we could introduce all over, for instance, every city in Canada. You could increase the density without any impact on the quality of life, and would actually provide the demographics to support very substantial, small-scale retail and commercial activities. So I think I don't actually believe that this experience is going to empty out cities, because that presupposes that you have the choice to leave, and most people don't.
Right.
So I think cities are here to stay. People need cities, and what there needs to be is appropriate leadership and science to figure out, as Adam was saying, how do people in Seoul take the subway every day and not get sick? It's possible. I think those are the things we have to grapple with. And at the same time, what we may need to do from a government perspective and a funding perspective is to reevaluate the allocation of money to infrastructure, because we may decide in the end you need to add 5 more subway cars onto every line to allow for that appropriate distancing. So for instance, now in many cities in Canada that have introduced public transit, say between the downtown and the airports, they've introduced the absolute minimum number of cars in a private public developed way to get people from one place to another. And it's always like, what's the minimum we can get away with? And the metrics was always financial investment. Maybe one of the things that happens now is we have to develop some other standards to put into the mix whenever you're doing transit, to say, sure, it's this many people, but they have to be 3 feet apart. Like whatever your design criteria is per person, if it was 3 meters diameter, maybe it needs to be 4, and that's going to cost something. And I think governments have to come on board to not only accept it, but get the information out that that's why we need to do it.
You know, one of the things that I'm aware of, and again, there's a whole robust chat going on in the by the participants with each other, which we're very appreciative of. It's like parallel worlds, which is great, and we'll try to track them and follow up as best we can. There are going to be more of these, and we're going to, you know, harvest whatever ideas people have for what the discussions need to be. It seems to me one of them is going to have to be on money. How are we going to finance these things? Cities are already laying, in Canada, Canadian cities are laying staff off. There are huge, huge debts that are accumulating on transit systems. So there's going to be a reconfiguring of how money is going to be, how cities are going to be financed going forward. And I think this works right down to the granular. As Alex hinted at, you know, is it any safer really to go to a Costco or a Walmart than it is actually to go to your corner store? Probably it's safer to go to your corner store. Frank, you mentioned food security. We know that you can track more closely. So is it possible that if we get the zoning right and we get the incentives right, we could actually see a resurgence of local street level businesses serving neighborhoods if more of us are working in those communities? We're a couple of minutes yet to finish, and so I'm going to ask everybody for a little rounding up comment. One general thing that's coming out is whether, it speaks to money, what's the future of big development projects, big redevelopment projects? Should they go on hold? Why don't you just, each of you, take a chance at saying what you think? If you were the czar of urbanism and you were looking for the next 6 months, what would you be prioritizing? Let's go to you first, Adam.
Well, I'll start kind of on a personal note, which is, you know, what my parents and what my children are dealing with in New York City. And they both can link back to the question. You know, my parents, more than anything, they're trying to find a way to get out every day. And they live in Manhattan, and getting to a significant wide open space is not easy. And so on a basic level, you know, starting to think about systems of continuous open space would be amazing. So, you know, let's find a way to do that. New York City's talked about that in terms of really having a continuous waterfront greenways. You know, and then there's my children who are doing digital learning, and we haven't talked too much about the digital side of things. And to a degree, it's working okay. They're doing remote learning, but it's not working for many, many, many children in New York City. And this idea that digital and smart cities can overcome everything is just not the case. We have a situation where, you know, these kinds of digital infrastructures need to overlap with social infrastructures and physical infrastructures. And there are, you know, the Department of Education is distributing internet-ready devices, but people don't have room in their apartments to suddenly create classrooms. You know,
Adam, I'm gonna stop you and go to the others. A minute each, guys. Frank?
I think the retail and the arts and culture. On the retail side, I think that the kind of progressive in instinct that has permeated through urban planning of having retail, we've gotten over the hump of condominium luxury apartments over retail, but now we have too much retail that's too expensive for the entrepreneurs. It's perfectly fine for the Starbucks and the large chains. So I think retail space at a micro level needs to be incentivized by not demanding any taxes for it and incentivizing landlords to basically give away the ground floor to energetic entrepreneurship and retail. The arts and culture have a role to play. In fact, they should be leading the charge, and they are. Spontaneous concerts held on Zoom by musicians. Watching Broadway musicals being enacted on 20 screens, the same people singing together. Last night there was a trombone going up and down the street, trombonist to cheer at 7 o'clock. We cheer our frontline workers. So I think we cannot give that up, and we won't give it up. So we're going to be coming back together sooner rather than later.
In some way.
And we'll have to come in under those in public spaces.
Okay, a minute to Janna, a minute to Alex, and then we're out.
I don't know why we should have to stop the developments that are midstream now. What I think we need to do, it's been really refreshing to me to see all levels, municipal, provincial, and federal, take a leadership role in in leading the way forward and taking really big risks financially, philosophically, to say this is what we need to do to get through it. And what I would hope is that they continue to take a leadership role as we move forward and say, what do we need to do now? Let's convene a group of scientists and designers to say, what do we need to do now to ensure that our public spaces, our transit, our gathering places, our shops are safe moving forward? And it may mean a greater investment in the public realm and a greater investment by the private sector, but that's where the government can't back down at all levels. They have to say, Mr. or Ms. Private Developer, sure, build your thing, but you know what? You're going to have to enhance your HVAC, or you're going to have to give 10% of your land to public space. To be
right, or you're going to have to adjust your lobby space so there's more space for the when we go into lockdown and we need to have more pickup space.
Exactly. And that's
right.
where we need the government.
I think there needs to be modifications quickly. Right. Okay, Alex, last comment to you, and then I'm going to wrap us up.
I'd agree with what Janna said. I think that, there's no question that government is going to have to get bigger in the wake of this pandemic. I mean, it's clear, even in Canada, as it certainly is in the United States, that, government doesn't have the capacity to do all of what we needed to do in a time of crisis. And I think that I hope and I expect that's how our politics are going to turn. And I think that has a lot of implications for urbanism as well. I think we need to, and you guys as professionals, really need to focus on basic things that might have been forgotten, about public health, about public education, about a strong and robust public realm that has a little bit of extra capacity and is, can actually serve everyone well. I think those arguments and those fundamentals of an equitable and just city maybe have been, it's been hard to talk in those terms for the last couple of decades, but I think we need to now, and I don't think there's any way to escape the need to create a bigger and more just city that has more capacity and that serves everybody.
We always say we're trying to promote that urbanism is for everyone, and that we're the ones that we've been waiting for here. We have the opportunity to figure out what the collective future for urban Canada is going to be. Adam, thank you for joining us from New York. Frank from Victoria, Janna from Toronto, and Alex, who covers the country. This is the first City Talk that we've done today. We will do one 2 days from now, Thursday. It's on the future of public engagement and citizen participation, resident participation. We're going to be doing a couple a week. Stay on our mailing lists. Make sure that we'll send you out stuff to tell you when this gets posted online. And if I could just thank you for being brave first responders for us to make this platform work. Thank you very much. And we'll be back soon with more from City Talk at the Canadian Urban Institute. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks very much.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.